Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of PodSaveChocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host and I'm your moderator. I'm also the creator, the publisher, the chief cook and bottle washer over at thechocolatelife.com. Today, I'm conducting an experiment. This is the first episode of PodSaveChocolate that's streaming only to YouTube. And so people who are watching me today, please go into the live chat and let me know where in the world you're connecting from, right? I'll get that shout out up on screen. And of course, during the course of the coming hour, if you have a question that you'd like to ask about anything that I talk about, put it into the live chat and I will get the question up on screen and get it asked and hope to answer it during the course of the coming hour. And with that, what I want to do is I want to jump directly to the topic of today's episode, which is about choconomics, or the economics of chocolate making. And this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life. You can go there right now and you can get all the links to this episode. For every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post. And this is the post for today's episode. You can go to that post, and what you'll do is you'll see a bunch of links to resources that I'm going to mention over the course of the hour, a bit of history. And if there are any other resources that are brought up during the course of the episode, I will get those episodes into this post shortly after I close down for today. And hey, I want to do a quick shout out to Judy Balk, who's connecting from New Hampshire here in the United States. Judy, thank you very much for joining me today. You may have connected on LinkedIn or Facebook before. I'm not quite sure, but this is the first time I think I've seen your name here on YouTube. So thank you very, very much for joining. I can see the names of people on YouTube. I just can't see their names on LinkedIn and Facebook. So thank you very, very much for joining me today. Right. And what I want to do is just quick overview is that over the past couple of months, I've spent some time looking at the high cost of expensive cocoa. What does that mean? And I've been focusing primarily from the farmer point of view, right? Not necessarily quite as much from the individual chocolate maker or chocolatier point of view. What does it mean? What does the high price of cocoa mean for you? And I'm going to go into that in quite some detail today, because I think that it might provide, the exploration will provide some tools and some insight that you can use in terms of thinking about your own business. There's a lot of stuff here having to do with primarily making chocolate, but also some tools that I think a chocolatier or someone like that who is working with a couverture that they're buying in can also work with. But just let me set a few seconds more to preface what's going on here. I wanted to do this episode in part because a Chocolate Life member came to me a couple of weeks ago and said, asked a question of how, what is the definition? What is the definition of microbatch? They're starting up a new chocolate business, and I think they're trying to figure out their positioning of their business. And they said, how do we define micro batch? And my response is here. And but primarily, I would say that the definition of who you are as a chocolate maker does not necessarily rest on your production capacity or the size of batches that you make. And so thinking about who you are as a chocolate maker and what you're doing as a chocolate maker, I don't necessarily know that thinking about it from, again, the perspective of how big a batch is it better to be a micro batch maker? What is the upper end of micro batch? Is the next state up mini batch or small batch? There's lots of stuff around those whole questions, which I think sort of miss the point. And that's the point of this article. The point of this article is that really what you want to be thinking about as a startup, right? I think it's really important. There are other questions that I think are more important first. Now, having gone there, I have done a whole lot of stuff on this topic over the course of years. This first one here, what does it really cost to set up a bean-to-bar chocolate factor? The original post was on the Chocolate Life back in 2011, and there's comment threads for a bunch of people through 2017 or thereabouts. So this is, there is the original version of this is on the Chocolate Life archive, and you can go to the Chocolate Life archive by clicking on TCL archive, and then you could go and search for the title of this if you wanted to see the original version of it, just to give you an idea that things haven't been mucked with. And maybe what I'll do is, it says originally published. What I may do is I put the may link directly there. It occurs to me that why not do that? Why make you go through the reference? But this is a topic. What does it cost to start up a business? What are the economics of chocolate making? Are ones that have been a thread, right, for quite some time. So more than a dozen years, right? And more recently, I did an episode. This is episode 31. We're at episode 51 now. So about a couple of months ago, starting a craft chocolate business top tips. So if you're going to start a craft chocolate business, what are some of the things that you need to know, right? So top tips. And what I did is I broke it down into a bunch of tips. They're in a toggle. And so, the first top tip is define success. So what does success mean for you as a business? And this is really important because it's going to guide all of the rest of the decisions for what you're going to do. So for example, if you're of retirement age and what you're looking to do is to set up a business that's going to keep you occupied and you're going to have a lot of fun, you've got a reasonable nest egg, you don't need this to be hugely profitable. This is if you're in your 20s and you're starting up this business and you're going to have children and you want to be able to put them through college someday here in the United States or someplace where you pay for college, then your definition of success is going to be different. And part of the definition of success is also going to be, what's your exit strategy, right? So am I creating a business for my children to take over? Am I creating a business that I'm going to sell? So for example, I think that I remember having a conversation, it was like 2005, so almost 20 years ago, with John Scharfenberger about the sale of Scharfenberger to Hershey Artisan Confections. And it was fairly obvious that when John and Robert were starting out with Scharfenberger, they were creating something that they were going to sell, right? And that's an exit strategy. So are you going to have something that you want your children to take over? Are you putting together something that you will be able to hand off to your employees? Is it something that you're putting together that you want an exit where somebody's going to buy? Those are parts of the definition of success. And a lot of that will get into what kind of investment am I going to need to be able to achieve that success. Right? And so that's really, really important starting off, right? In terms of an economic platform, right? So what are my goals for my business? You have to start there, right? Right. Now, you don't need to know much about chocolate making. You don't need to know much about food. You don't need to know much about food marketing at this point. But having a good handle on finances, right, from the very beginning. How much money am I going to need in order to be able to achieve what it is that I want to do? This is where you have to start off, right? Now, I'm not going to read all of the rest of these top tips because they don't involve things having to do with economics. But the next economic here is to understand that your highest business costs are going to be labor related, right? And this is one of the fundamental differences between a small craft / artisanal chocolate maker or chocolatier and a bigger industrial chocolate maker. If you're a bigger maker, what you've done is you've invested in automation to be able to reduce your labor costs to a certain point. I want to get my labor costs as low as possible, right? Because it is the highest cost. So if I have to find a new employee, finding the employee, training the employee, retaining the employee, all of the things associated with burdened overhead on the employee, the amount of hours, seconds or minutes that any individual employee is engaged in hands-on, right? Whether it's hand dipping as opposed to enrobing, all of these things are going to affect. And these affect your final cost of goods, right? The total cost of manufacturing. And these are things that are under your control. One of the things that we've learned over the course of the last year is that the cost of the base ingredient of chocolate, cocoa beans, is not under your control for the most part, right? And if you don't have control over those sorts of things, you need to exert or at least understand what the costs you are incurring that are under your control, right? And so understand that your highest business costs are labor related. There is an issue around equipment, which is really, really important, which is if you can't afford the equipment you need, don't buy the equipment you can afford if immediately buying the equipment you can afford puts you behind the 8 ball. So, there's a truism sort of in computing that when you fix a bottleneck, all it does is that bottleneck has hidden another bottleneck. And so if you have a bottleneck in your production and you remove the bottleneck, it's going to reveal another bottleneck in your production. And so one of the ways that you can reduce the cost of labor is to invest in the right kind of equipment. Really, really important. So for example, if I'm thinking about scaling up production, does it make sense to go from one 35 kilogram melanger to another 35, add another 35 kilogram melanger, right? Or would it make sense to invest in a pre-refiner so that I'm spending less time in my melanger, and then a dedicated conch so I'm spending less time in my melanger? And because it turns out that pre-grinding and conching will take a lot less time than the time spent in the melanger. So we need to be very careful about how we think about the cost of labor and investment in equipment and how it contributes to the total cost of manufacturing. Really, really important there. Right? And I'm going to leave all the rest of these to you at some other time to go and look through this. This post, right, is in the link to this post is in today's episode post. So before I go on to the next one, what I want to do is give a quick shout out to Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce Chocolates, Kittredge, Colorado. Hey guys, look forward to podcast. Thank you, offering a unique perspective on the business. The Chocolate Workbook is very useful. Hey, Mark and Yuri, thank you very much for that. Just a quick note about that. I will be referring in detail. I have an updated version of the workbook that's here that I will be referring to because I was looking at it this morning and I realized this morning, and I realized that there were some things that I wanted to make a little bit clearer, right, and a little bit more obvious. In terms of the interrelationship between some of the worksheets and some of the things that I was doing, and the point that I wanted to make for today's episode. And I also wanted to let everybody know that if you are a Chocolate Life member, whether it's a free member or a premium member, this Sunday's episode, the all-member AMA call, is going to be Sunday. Again, it's going to start at 10 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, Mountain Standard Time, going to run for about 90 minutes. The topic is going to be ethical cacao sourcing. Right, I'm writing an article for International Confectionery Magazine and would love to have your input on what you think ethical means. What's important to you on ethical. So if you want to join me on Sunday, if you're not a member, go become a member. You can go and click on the Chocolate Life. There's this June newsletter. And if you are in fact a member, there's going to be a link to the episode right here, the June member AMA call. Just click on that link and join me on Sunday morning. I just want to do a quick diversionary post. Another aspect of where we all are in terms of the high price of cocoa is that when we think of working with cocoa, chances are maybe all we're thinking about is making chocolate bars. And yes, it's called craft chocolate, and many people call themselves a bean to bar chocolate maker. And one of the challenges with self-identifying as a bean to bar maker is that what it does is it puts blinders around your thinking. Now, unconsciously for the most part, although it may be a conscious thing, all we're going to do as a bean to bar maker is make bars. But in these difficult times, right? And by difficult, I mean uncertainty because of the volatility in cocoa pricing, right? Perhaps it makes sense to start thinking in terms of other kinds of products. I'm a chocolate maker. What can I make with my chocolate? I'm a chocolatier. What can I make with my chocolate? So even though we're not happy about, the quantity of sugar in things, right? So for example, sugar is a relatively inexpensive ingredient. And maybe what I could do is I could do a nut brittle with cacao nibs. So cacao nibs, again, relatively expensive, but they could be an ingredient in a product which is a much more, which is a larger percentage of inexpensive ingredients. So, and now all of a sudden you've got, a wide range of things, a pine nut cacao nib brittle with and without like red hatch chili. I'm in the Southwest, right? So I'm thinking about, hatch chili pepper powder. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do. And this episode here, right, which is Gear Geek Deep Dive, is a list of a bunch of different kinds of tools that you might look like. So these are pieces of equipment that you might use, that you might go, oh, I could see how I could use this equipment to do something new and interesting, right? For example, do you have a dehydrator in your workshop? If you don't, you should have a dehydrator, right? If you're thinking about something interesting, maybe a freeze dryer would be interesting, right? And because it gives you access to some ingredients you normally wouldn't have, particularly flavoring ingredients, right? That you can control in your own, the price of in your own workshop. And yes, there is a CapEx. You have to go out and buy or lease this freeze dryer, but you can do a little payback analysis to say, I can make this for 50% of what I can purchase it for, right? And therefore, if I make a lot of this, right, or I make lots of different products that use the output of this piece of equipment, I can do lots of different things and I can make more money, right? And I think that's the important part of this. And although, the Gear Geek here, rethinking the chocolate workshop is about, it's an exercise, right, in helping people not think outside the box and not throw the box away, but to forget what boxes are. Just like, let's throw out all our assumptions on what it means to be a chocolate maker. Let's throw out all my assumptions about what it means to be a chocolatier, right? If I had any 3 pieces of this equipment, what would that mean for me right now, right? And what could I do with them? I mean, for example, this Ice Chef texturing machine, hopefully this, all right, well, this link is broken. I'm gonna have to go fix that. So this was a machine that would take a liquid and turn it into a thin sheet. It's a drum which was frozen, and you put the liquid on it, and it creates, right, a frozen version of it immediately, right? And if I was had a retail shop in which I was selling coffee or chocolate beverages, it would go, man, what could I do with something like this, right? So this is what this is about. This is all about, oh man, here's a really, really interesting machine. What might I do with this, right? So it's very, very cool to look at. Now, I will say that for anything that has an Amazon, says, look at this on Amazon, those are affiliate links, right? And so your purchase of these things will help the Chocolate Life, doesn't affect your cost. But I just wanted to let people know that was there. There's some great books, there's some ingredients. These are all about, okay, if I buy into the notion that there are other things in the world to make other than chocolate bars, this is a way to go through fundamental creative exercises and thinking, right, to get you into saying, oh, I'm a chocolate maker or I'm a chocolatier. What are things that I can do with chocolate that I'm not currently doing, right? And there are sorry, that was my bad. If you'll click and let me know that you can hear me again, I think you can. I'm being really excitable here, and I've done something I've never done before. Anyway, so I just wanted to let you know that you can come back here, and some of what's going on here in this this episode on gear, the Deep Dive Gear Geek, refers to some of the topics that are in some of these other episodes, and so you'll get they connect with each other. So it's important to understand that's what's going on. And there are also some older posts. So about scaling up, there was an Ask the Chocolate Life episode on scaling up, and I also did a PodSaveChocolate episode. So the Ask the Chocolate Life post, and then a PodSaveChocolate episode. And I believe also this one was on the Chocolate Life archive originally. Nope. It was posted here. It was posted here on the Chocolate Life. So yeah, go there. Hey, and again, Mark, if you're watching, just give me a quick heads up and let me know if you can still hear me and you're still seeing me after getting kicked out accidentally of the episode. So please let me know. So what I want to do now is go back to something that I talked about a little bit earlier, and it's something that Mark and Yuri mentioned, which is that I have created a workbook, right? And this is a workbook, and there's links to older versions around the Chocolate Life. You can find it in at least one of the posts that are linked to, but I think the versions I've linked to are quite old, maybe from 2020. And this is the update today. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go and talk about this page on the workbook. Okay, I wanted to. So again, Mark, thanks for letting me know that I'm back. Just I have two screens here, and if I'm not paying attention to which screen I am, and I'm not careful, I can kick myself out of the studio. I've never done that before. In like 200 episodes. I think this might be the 200th episode between the Chocolate Life Live and PodSaveChocolate. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to everybody walk through this workbook, right, and show you some of the changes that I've made and give you an idea about where I think changes could be made. Now, if you're not a premium member of the Chocolate Life already, you can join this. There's a link in today's episode, right, where what you can do is you can go and order an hour worth of consulting. And what we'll do is we'll focus on how we can use this particular updated workbook for your business. But what I wanted to do was focus on a couple of things, right, to give you an idea, right? So the first one is on this particular page. It says chocolate costing, and it's naive. And the reason why it's naive is not all the costs are accounted for here, right? So this is a starting point for working, right? But we'll give people an overview. So number one is we start with what the farm gate price of cocoa beans is. And I haven't updated this, but so this is what it was from the last time I opened it, which was probably 6 months ago, right? And then what we have is this here. So we start off here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hide me in the corner, and I'm going to jump this up. So make it a little easier. Let me get it bigger. So we have the farm gate price of cocoa beans, and we have the cost delivered, right? And these are two fields that we type into, all right, and we give an indication for. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with, this is 10 kilograms of cocoa beans, so 10,000 grams. We're going to go clean the cocoa beans, and then we're going to weigh how many beans do we have, what's the weight in beans after we clean them. We're going to have a calculated loss factor, and we're going to use that to calculate the cost of cleaned beans per kilo. So if I have $8 per kilo, right, that's what I'm paying, and I have 7% loss factor, then my cost per cleaned kilo of beans is $8.56. This is naive because I'm not factoring in right now how much time it took me to clean those 10 kilos of beans, right? And so one of the things that I want to do, perhaps, if somebody wants an exercise here, is to show you how to include something like that in this worksheet. So what we have is we started off with 10 kilos. We ended up with 9.3 kilos. We start the roasting. We started out with 9.3 kilos. We go to 8.7 kilos. After winnowing, we're at 7.1 kilos, which means our yield from 10 kilos to the amount of usable nib we have is 71%. So this is the foundation of understanding the cost of the chocolate component. Right. So what we have here is we start a recipe. So the weight of nibs or liquor in the recipe at this point, for some reason, I've got it as I'm doing a 72% recipe. This is actually equal to, we're doing this on the fly, equal to this. Nope. Here, I'm doing this. We'll figure this out. So this is a 70% recipe. It's hard coded. I calculated 72%. I'm going to have to go and actually put that in there, right? But I've got the weight of nibs, added cocoa butter, right? So the percent of added cocoa butter, I get the weight of added cocoa butter. Here's the recipe, the percent sugar in the recipe. I notice there's a typo there for the first time. I've got the weight of sugar in the recipe, right? If there are any other ingredients in the recipe, so I have a total recipe weight, right? So I start off with 25 kilos more or less of nibs. I add some cocoa butter. I add some sugar for a 72% recipe, and I turn off with 33.5 kilos, right? So what I've also done is I've just sort of added, listen, I'm going to spend 10 hours of hands-on labor in this recipe. And that 10 hours of hands-on labor is the cost of cleaning, the amount of time spent cleaning the cocoa beans, the amount of time spent sort of hand feeding the nibs and hand feeding the sugar into the melanger, right? The amount of time spent cracking and winnowing, right? Hands-on watching, the amount of time spent, hands-on watching, roasting and cooling. So this figure here is a figure that I'm just using overall. And one of the things we can do to improve this worksheet is to understand how individual components. So to break this 10 hours down and end up calculating it rather than just asserting it. But for the time being, it will fit in. Right. So what I've got over here is I've got some other fixed costs. I've calculated the cost of cocoa nibs. So, 71% yield times, $8 and, at $8.56%, it will give me, right, the cost of nibs, right? I've got the cost of cocoa butter, the cost of sugar, right, the cost of vanilla, and then the cost of labor. What this allows me to do is to go and calculate the cost of the nibs in the recipe, right? The cost of the cocoa butter in the recipe, the cost of sugar in the recipe, right? They're really, really simple stuff, right? And then the cost of labor in the recipe. And so this is like 10 hours of labor. So what happens if a recipe actually takes me 20 hours, right? So all of a sudden, bang, right? This goes to 55%, right? So it turns out that, right, the cost of labor is something that's within our control, right? And it's one of the few things that's within our control. And we can see that changing the cost of labor has a huge impact on the cost of the recipe, right? And the percent contribution that's going on, right? And why is that important? Because, if we go and say, I'm going to use the farm gate price, but let's say, I'm buying from Uncommon, and Uncommon says, listen, we're paying $8 a kilo farm gate price, and the cost to me is $13 a kilo, right? And what we do is we find that my labor went from, what was it, 33%, right? 38% to, right, to 28%, right? My cost of recipe went in here. So we can see that what I can do is I have another spreadsheet here. And what I can do is I can go, okay, right? So what happens if the farm gate price is $8 a kilo, right? And I've got, right, the delivered price is $13 a kilo. So my cost per kilo of clean beans is $13.91, right? And if I'm going too fast, let me know and I will slow down. There's a lot to go through, but I want to slow down. Is what happens is, I'm not entirely sure why this is $19.59 a kilo for the cost of nib, because it's after the cost of roasting. That's why that is. I'm going to go cost per kilo is $19.59. That's where it is. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say the cost of kilo is $19.59. All right, of beans. So I can see that, I've gone with the same labor. I've gone from the cost of nibs, right, and what its contribution is for a recipe, and the cost of labor. So it's important to keep those in mind. Switching back and forth between screens makes it a challenge to be able to keep those numbers in mind. But what I have done is I've gone and said, okay, let's do this, right? Let's put this in context if we can. So I have a batch capacity of, for some reason, it's, let's say I'm doing 35,000 grams. I can produce 2 batches a week. So it's a 35 kilo melanger. I'm doing 2 batches a week. This is what my production capacity is. If I have a 70-gram bar, I can produce 1,000 bars a week, right? So I'm going to sell 250 bars per week, right? So this is a sales and profitability worksheet where you can model, right? Mark, what's my final cost per gram to produce? Let me get back to, well, here, let me see if I can go do this. What I've done here is, what I can say is that here's the total cost of ingredients in the recipe is $518. What I can do is I can calculate it. So it's $21.77 per kilo. I could take this and divide by 1,000 and get cost per gram. So it's basically in here, but I haven't actually calculated price per gram. I could get price per gram. It wouldn't be that difficult. But what I've got is an input price of $13 per kilo for beans before doing anything, and a finished chocolate cost of $21.77 per kilo. Now let's see what happens if I go from 10 hours to 20 hours. And here's what happens. All of a sudden, it's gone up to $27 per kilo. So it's gone up significantly, right? Keep in mind that the cost of labor is the one thing that you have control over, right? And if you're producing 1,000 kilograms a year, then this is a not insignificant difference in price in terms of labor, right? Even if you're not paying yourself, you need to know what this cost is, because it will affect your, number one, your run rate, your burn rate, what your level of basic profitability is, how much free cash flow you have to do things other than purchase ingredients. It's really important to know these things. But Mark, because this is here and you've got an older copy of the sheet, what you could do is you could go in and just divide by 1,000, here. Oh, let's do that. So we're going to do this. We're going to close this up here. We're going to put this here, and we're going to divide by 1,000, right? And now we have 3 cents per gram, right? Right. It's actually 0.2783 cents per gram. Simple to find, but it's there, right? So let's go back to this other sheet, which talks about sales and profitability. So let's assume that everything you sell is at retail, right? So you're not doing anything wholesale. You have no gross income from wholesale, right? Your retail percentage is 100%. You're selling 250 bars per week. Let's say our sales are $500 per week, right? All right, my gross income from retail sales is here. My gross profit from retail sales. So I'm doing some calculations about cost from up here, right? My gross profit is here, right? And I can do my gross profit for year and my overhead and my loss, right? So this is constructed in such a way that if it's negative, right, it will turn red. So, all right, so this gives you an idea here. So what you can do is you can use those numbers. So I'm using those numbers and I'm saying the farm gate price of beans is $8 a kilogram. My price of nib is $19.59 a kilogram, right? So if I'm going to do, right, 1,000 kilos of beans, right, my farm gate price is, if this 1,000 is the number of grams in a kilo, right? Because I want to multiply this by 1,000. And I don't know why I'm doing it that way. I could actually just multiply by 1,000, right, in the formula. I'll fix that, right? But the farm gate price is 8,000 a kilo for beans. What I can then do is, here's my yield, here's my percent of nibs in recipe, here's the total amount of chocolate that I can make from that recipe, here's my bar weight, here's the total number of bars that I can make, here's the average price that I'm selling the bars, here's how much I make from selling the chocolate. And what happens is that, the cost of beans is the farm gate price of the cost of beans is only 5% of the cost of the retail price of the chocolate. Now, if what I wanted to, I could go and further this out and I could start saying, here's my cost for making the bars. All right. So I could say, so this here, $2.60 is my cost of goods sold, right? As opposed to the retail price and the wholesale price. And what I've got is those come from this worksheet. So this worksheet says, here's the cost of a wrapper element. Here's the labor associated with wrapping it. Here, these two things. Here's the cost of the chocolate. I'm referring to another spreadsheet here, so I'm assuming it's good. Here's the loss factor just overall, right? And so, this loss factor is how much am I losing in the machinery, how much am I losing in the tempering machine. If something is breaking, that's what the loss factor is, right? Yeah. Right. I haven't added overhead costs. So what is the cost of the machinery? So if I'm amortizing the cost of machinery because I've got it on a lease, or am I amortizing is a lease? There's a machine cost associated with this, and I can figure out how much that is per bar, right? Factoring in rent and utilities and all the other things that are associated with it. If I want to get to that level of detail, I don't know that it's absolutely necessary to do that for a small chocolate maker, but there are the resources here to at least put that framework together. So I've got a bar weight, the chocolate weight, the weight of inclusions, the number of wrap elements, the cost of ingredients, the cost of wrap elements. Here, let's zoom this up. All right. So here is the weight of the bar, all those sorts of things, the cost of ingredients, the cost of the wrap elements, cost of goods sold. This cost of goods sold, right, goes from here. I can generate the minimum wholesale price from this if I'm giving myself a gross margin, and there's a difference between gross margin and markup. Make sure you understand the difference in terms of the formula. But if I have a 25% gross margin, right, then what happens is that my minimum wholesale price is $3.46 from $2.60. Maybe not enough. But you can start modeling what the impact is of changing the gross margin is, right, for doing this. And keep in mind that this $1.28 here, which is shown here, which is above your cost of goods sold, is to take care of every other cost that's not already included in the model, right? So the more uncertainty you have in terms of other costs, you want the greater the gross margin to be, right? So from that, you can say, oh, I'm giving a 10% margin to a broker, a 10% margin to a distributor. I haven't calculated VAT. If you're in the UK, you'd need to calculate VAT. You've got the retail price. So I go to the grocer and I give the grocer 100% markup. So my $3.88 bar minimum wholesale price, if I go through a distributor, broker, and I go through a distributor and I sell it at retail, that's the price. So I can say, I believe I can 0% here, and I can 0% here. So I'm selling it direct, right? So so I can, from $1.28, I can go to $7.75, 388 wholesale price, $7.75 retail price. So you have the ability here to figure out what these numbers are, right? Really, really important. You can then say how much, right, is the retailer capturing of the price. Retailer's getting 50% of the price, right, because of this, right? If I add a 10% distributor margin, you can figure it out there. So you have the ability to do these kinds of things. So what you can then do is, what's the number of bars per kilogram, the number of kilograms that you're producing in chocolate per year. There is an overview sheet here that'll give you just a gross profitability calculation, right? Sorry, I'm here. And now what you can do is you can put together an average return per kilo of chocolate, an average return per kilo of chocolate, depending on how much of the wholesale and retail you're capturing, right? So if I'm capturing 100% of the retail, my average return is $121 per kilo, right? I'm making 7,000 kilos a year. And so if I'm doing 100% at retail, then my gross, right, return, my gross revenues are going to be about 850,000 a year. Okay, so that's what you do it. If you're doing 100% at wholesale, what you do is you find out that, wow, you're making a lot less. And so what you can do is, I haven't calculated this in yet, but you can go to this worksheet and you can start referring to these cells to give you an idea, what happens if I'm doing 50%, and then you can go and refer to these cells on this sheet, and you can get these numbers calculated in from here. So there's a really, really good view in terms of understanding this. Why is that important? Why is that important? And the reason why it's important, right, is this, right? which is, all right, let me get rid of this, the volatility in the price of cocoa. What you have control over the prices, many of the prices in your workshop. You don't have control over the price of the cocoa beans. So what we go back to the 19th of April, January, March, we go back to the 19th of April, and this is the high, 12,250 a kilo, right? And that's the futures price. So the farm gate price could be anywhere from about 4,000, right, to a multiple of this 12,000. So some people were looking for, if I'm a specialty cocoa bean producer, right, I might have been looking for 18 or 19,000 a kilo because I'm using the fact that the price has gone up to raise my prices. So that's something. But if I was in Ghana or the Ivory Coast or Grenada or someplace like that, the farm gate price of the cocoa is set by fiat, set by the local cocoa authority. And so I need to understand what the farm gate price is. This is the price on the exchanges. It's usually delivered price, and it's usually for buying large quantities, multiple containers. But we can start thinking about the price history. And what we do is we find that we at one point we were down at just over 7,000, right? So here we're at 7209, 7166, volatility 88, 71, 9,000, 77, right? 82, 89,000 again. We're up at 10,000, 10,500. We went down. So, and now we're down again. So this is yesterday's close. If I want to, I can go and, from the same chart right here, I can see the live pricing, right? Right. So I'm sure that there are bunches of people who are looking at these numbers and going, oh my God, what does this mean? What am I doing? Right. What do I need to worry about? Right. And that's where this worksheet comes in, specifically this one. Right. So what happens, right? So let's do this. I have the cost of cocoa butter. So what happens, I'm going to do this. What happens when the price of cocoa butter goes from $10 a kilo to $15 a kilo, right? Look, we can see the cost of the recipe. Let's undo this, right? So a 50% increase in the cost of cocoa butter takes a recipe that used to cost $918, right? And that recipe now costs $923. Oh my gosh. Really? That's not all that much when you think about it. Hey, it went from 918 to 923. Now that's assuming a 4% added cocoa butter, right? I haven't filled this. What happens if it's 5% added cocoa butter, right? Right. This is why we need to be very, very careful in thinking about the price of things. We go, I have a 50% increase in the cost of cocoa butter. But if you're adding 5% cocoa butter to a 35 kilogram recipe, the increase in price is 8%, right? And we've gone from, let's do this again. And we haven't really changed. We got from 3% of recipe cost to 4% recipe cost, right? Okay. Right? What happens if we go from, right? So, $5 a kilo farm gate to $9 a kilo delivered, right? What we'll do is we'll find that, the cost of labor is now a lot higher, right? Which makes an enormous amount of sense. What is the cost of cocoa butter? It's the same. What does this do? Well, the cost of cocoa butter is now 5% of the recipe, but chances are, if it's 50% of 9, this number is now 13.5, right? Right. And okay, you get an idea. We need to be very, very careful about how we understand these numbers. And then if we come in and we look and we say the farm gate price is 5, my nib price is now the cost of my chocolate based upon all these other things I've done is the farm gate price of cocoa beans contributes 7% to the retail price of the chocolate bar, right? This is why it's really, really important to have an understanding on the cost of things, right? Is because everybody is going, oh my gosh, this is now costing me, my cocoa butter is now 50% more than it was a week ago, right? Or 50% more than it was 3 months ago, right? Go through this exercise, right? In terms of understanding what your cost structure is, and understanding what is the actual cost of the increase in cocoa cocoa beans. What does it mean? Actually, what does it mean to you? What is the cost of cocoa butter? What does it mean? Is there an increase in the cost of sugar? Can I find a different cost of sugar if sugar is important to me? Can I find a different source for vanilla? Is it $100 a kilogram? Is it 300 a kilogram? It doesn't really matter because there's no vanilla in the recipe, right? So, right, it's, that doesn't have an effect on what we're doing, right? If I'm doing milk, obviously that's an issue. Other ingredients, things like that. Other ingredients in this particular case doesn't include the cost of inclusions, because the inclusions, oh yeah, no, I'm gonna have to put the cost of inclusions and the weight of inclusions in here as an independent element. I could, yeah, because my bar weight is this, the cost of inclusions. There are ways to figure out where we're gonna do that, right? But you can get a rough idea immediately what's gonna be the impact. I mean, we could enter 2 or 3 numbers and get a really idea about what this does in terms of impact, in terms of, how much is it actually costing me to produce a bar of chocolate? And then what does that mean in terms of profitability? I mean, this is the important part of understanding the economics of your business. And it's a level of detail that I don't know that a lot of people go into, but I think that when you do go through it, you might be able to relax just a tiny bit in terms of understanding what the impact is at the individual bar level, at the individual cost level. Where it doesn't help is just sticker shock. Oh my gosh, I bought 100 kilos of cocoa butter 3 months ago and it cost me $800. I'm buying that same 100 kilos of cocoa butter now, and the price is now 50% more. I'm looking at the invoices and I'm going, oh my gosh, right? And where that's a challenge, where that's an issue for everyone, right, is managing cash flow, right? It's, what is the cost of inventory and what is the carrying cost of inventory? How many ingredients do you need to have in order to meet what amount of production in what amount of time, right? And what are the carrying costs? So you should have, and it's not in here, but we should have an idea of how much inventory you have and what the value of that inventory is, right? And if there is a dollar cost associated with holding the inventory, and there is at a minimum rent on the floor space that the inventory takes up. So if you've got a room that's your cocoa beans are in, and let's say that room is cooled down to 55 degrees so that cocoa moth larvae doesn't hatch, right? Then there's a cost of electricity associated with that. So we need to have some cost of inventory. There may be some other carrying costs associated with that cost of inventory, right? And we can model what changes in electricity and changes in rent and other stuff that we need to do in order to make this model for you, right, reflect your individual circumstances. And that's one of the reasons why I do this. While I give a very, very simplistic version of this away, and have in the past, this is actually the basis of a fair amount of focus when it comes to consulting, understanding where we're spending a lot of money, right? And where, if we invest or rethink the process, make it more efficient, then we can save costs. We can take the things that we have control over in terms of the cost, and we can actually exercise control of them. And part of it may be, if you think of yourself as a bean-to-bar chocolate maker, and what you do is you say, oh my gosh, what's most important to me is I have this equation in my mind that the more time I spend, right, the higher the quality of the product is. So for example, if I very meticulously hand sort cocoa beans, I hand sort them, and I look at every single one, what does that mean, right? So it's not reflected here, and one of the changes that I will make is I'm going to make this a little bigger. What I would do is I would put the amount of time spent cleaning right here, the amount of time spent cleaning, and then we've got I would actually make this constant, which is over here, the cost of labor per hour, right? Average burden labor cost per hour. So I would put that here. And so I would know, okay, this is exactly how much it's costing me to clean a batch of cocoa beans, right? And it turns out that you're going to discover very, very quickly that it makes sense to find ways to automate. So there are small bean cleaning machines. Maybe it makes sense to purchase one of those, right? Or it makes sense to spend another dollar per kilo at the farm level, right? Because it turns out that $1 a kilo per farm level, or $1 an hour cleaning, right, is going to save you a lot of money at your end, right? Really, really important to understand there. But if you say all of a sudden, oh my gosh, it's taking me half an hour to sort through enough beans to put in a batch of chocolate, and that's an extra $10, right, in terms of the cost of the batch. And what does that mean in terms of this? So if I were to bump this number up, right, the cost of clean beans, and I've got the cost of clean nibs, right? I could do a contribution of labor into here really, really quickly. All right. And you get an idea that, oh, this represents, right, a stumbling block. This represents a bottleneck. This represents a place where, with some investment, with some time, with some money, what I can do is I can reduce my overall production costs. And in this time, right now, when you have no control over the cost of the primary ingredient in your product, cocoa beans, you should be doing everything you can to reduce labor everywhere you can, right? Now, the question is, how do you do that without sacrificing your idea of quality, right, is an issue that's up for debate, right? But this is where it's really, really important to understand what's going on. Now, if you're a chocolatier, I think there are some really important things that you can do. So, for example, and this is actually going to be for a chocolate maker as well who's doing bars, but let's get this up here. So, what we want to do is we want to figure out how many bars per hour can I produce, and if I can figure this out, what I can do is I can plug this into my other calculations. So, if I'm doing a 75-gram bar, right, and I've got a 75-gram bar. It's right here. Do it. Right. And there are 4 cavities per mold, and I can deposit 6 molds per minute. Right. What I can do is I'm doing 1 6-hour production shift 5 times a week, 50 weeks a year. This is the number of hours in production I am every year. And what I can do is I can actually say, this number is coming from this here. So it's 6 molds a minute, which means I'm doing 24 bars a minute, right? This is the amount of kilograms of chocolate per minute that I need. Right, this is what this represents. And now I can think about tempering capacity. So if I'm doing 1.8 kilograms per hour, that's not a whole, that's per minute, right? So I need 108 kilograms chocolate per hour, right? Oh, wow. If I want to be able to produce, right, this is 24 bars a minute, then I need a lot of chocolate. I need a big tempering machine. So what this says is, here's the number of molds I'm going to turn through in every shift. Right, here's the number of bars I'm going to produce, 8,400 bars in a shift, right? This is the kilograms of chocolate I'm going to produce in a shift. I need in a shift to deposit these bars. So if I want to produce at this level, I need 650 kilograms of chocolate before I start production on that day, right? Many people don't really have a solid understanding of what this means, right? And so what you can do is you can plug these figures in, you can do all these stuff, you can figure out, here's not only what I can produce in any given amount of time, right? Theoretical maximum, assume everything is running perfectly, no downtime, all that kind of stuff, which of course is something you need to consider, right? But this is actually the amount of chocolate I need. So, in this particular case, right, this is 162 metric tons per year. The previous ones are around 7 metric tons per year. So there's obviously a big mismatch here. But you can go and figure this out, right? I could do a simple calculation that says, if I'm producing 7 metric tons per year, right, how many bars per week do I want to be able to produce? Relatively trivial in terms of upgrading the sheet in order to be able to figure this out, right? So that's one thing. So if you have a tempering machine, maybe you're thinking about enrobing. I would think about it. Enrobing is a relatively high rate of productivity way of producing finished bonbons, for example, or finished other products. A panning machine is another good thing to think about. But what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to think about, if I have a a um, a belt on a tempering machine, which is 180 millimeters wide. I have a tunnel, let's say it's 8 meter wide. The time in the tunnel, right, is 10 minutes. My belt speed is 0.8 of a meter per minute. So these are just, I'm setting up what I need to, what I can possibly produce. So I then think about the number of pieces of chocolate I can get across per row. So if I'm doing a 25 millimeters or 1 inch square on an 8 inch belt, I can put 5 pieces with some spacing in between them, right? Maybe this is 4 because that makes more sense. I can get 8 rows per meter. So I got to get them on, and then I've got to put them on, and I put them on, so I can do 8 rows per meter, right? What that says is I can do 32 pieces per meter, right? Right? Per minute, maybe, right? Pieces per minute on average. And now I can say with this 7-inch belt producing at 32 pieces per meter, right? Running at a specific speed, I can enrobe 1,536 pieces per hour, right? And so if I've got the average weight of chocolate on a piece is 8 grams, I need 13 kilos of chocolate, or 12.5 kilos of chocolate, right? And I can do some calculations in terms of now I've got another price. But you can see what I've done here is how much chocolate do I need in order to be able to produce a certain product? And now what we can do is say, here's my cost of goods. I could throw this, I could do another cost of goods versus here's my wholesale and retail price. Hey, it's costing me 35 cents a piece to make this, including the cost of chocolate and the cost of the center, 35 cents a piece per make. I can sell them at retail for $3 a piece. I can wholesale them for $1.50. That might be a good way to go, right? However, now if I'm hand dipping, my labor costs change, right? And so we can just think of, how many pieces per minute or how many pieces per hour can I hand dip? And you can get a sense for what your costs are, right? And this is when we talk about Choconomics, right? So there are other worksheets in here. Again, I get into these on a more specific basis with individual clients. What we can do is we can actually get down and say to the hour, how much does it cost to run a machine, right? So I've got a machine, it's a Melanger, it cost me $10,000. I have a 3-year depreciation schedule. Here's the floor space that the machine requires. Here's the cost per square foot for the rent, right? What I can do is I can then take this per hour, right? The cost of energy, how many, if I've got kilowatt hours per hour on the machine, what does that mean in terms of the amount of energy I'm consuming? How many units per hour? What is the cost of energy? What is the cost of labor? Now I can calculate when the machine is just sitting there not doing anything, this is how much it costs me per hour, right? When I'm actually running the machine, this is how much it costs. I can now factor the cost of this machine into my cost of goods sold, right? Rather than sort of generically have it buried into an overhead price. And it turns out that I can do this. So for example, if I have a bean cleaning machine, right, I can do the same thing, right? With the same set of assumptions. My cracker and winnower, same thing. I could say, here is the retail price of this cracker winnower for this throughput, and then the retail price of another cracker winnower for another throughput. And it may be that even though one might cost twice as much, CapEx, the amount of money up front that I need in order to do it, when you actually go look at it as, it only cost me, a half a cent an hour more just to have it sitting around, and it only cost me 1.5 cents an hour to run it. I mean, it makes sense to think about that investment as soon as possible because you are controlling the price of those things, right? If I've got a pre-grinder, if I have a conch, I've got tempering and molding, this is a way that you can think about, okay, how do I go and figure out where my bottlenecks are in terms of costs? Where am I spending money? A lot of money, right? And are there ways, and how much is it costing me, right? Not CapEx, not just upfront, but how much is it costing me on a per hour basis in order to do these things, right? This is why these spreadsheets and these workbooks are really important. And it comes from an economics and chocolate perspective that this is where you really want to get, right, your hands on things. We've done all of these things, and now, okay, there's one more, two more, but one of them is, oh my gosh, here what we can do is just a general overhead, right? We can take a look at all the other things. So rent, utilities, machine costs, consumables, Non-manufacturing salaries, the cost of sales, marketing and advertising, travel and entertainment, professional service. You need legal services, you need accounting services, right? You're a member of the FCIA. What is my liability insurance? And you can now use other things, right? Overhead. Oh, you can say, here's how much it's costing me on an hourly basis to run my business. I mean, really, really important stuff to know. And when you have this, what you can do is you can um, get a really, really good understanding, right, of where you need to focus your intention, right, in this time of extreme volatility in the pricing of cocoa, to be able to understand this is where I need to invest my time and attention. This is where I can reduce costs. This is where I can reduce the cost of labor, right? So this is where, if I spend a couple of dollars on this machine, it reduces my cost of labor. The payback cost, and anything that pays back in less than 3 years is a really good investment. There are many investments here that will pay back in 1 year, right? And if you can do a payback in 1 year, oh my gosh, you should be running to someone and say, I need to buy this machine, or I need to implement this process in order to do it, right? And this is all what every single chocolate maker and chocolatier needs to do, right? When they start thinking about how does the increase in the cost of my raw material, my primary raw material, the increase in the cost of cocoa bean, the increase in the cocoa butter, increase in the cost of cocoa butter, the increase in the cost of cocoa powder, the increase in the cost of couverture, right? How is it going to have an impact on my business, right? At a very, very granular, detailed level. And if what you need to do is, you have the time, we're coming into the summer, July and August are going to be relative downtimes for most people, spend an hour a day, right? Thinking about this stuff, going through this exercise, right? And coming into the next season, really understanding how you are better prepared to be able to mitigate the effects of just wild swings in price. Now, I mean, if we were to go back to today's episode, jumping around, and look at the price of cocoa here and the average that we're doing, what does this mean? What does this volatility mean for you, right? Now, you have no control over this price whatsoever, right? And you need to figure out what it is that I can do, what is it you can do in order to be able to say, to mitigate this volatility. Now, we had a maximum price of $12,250. That was on the 19th of April. We've seen, if we go back to, the 30-day price history, right? This is an insane amount of volatility. And this is, the price the big players are paying. You don't have any control over this whatsoever. What's really, really interesting to think about, and this is what the last real big point I want to make on this topic, is the reason why I believe that this price topped out in 250 is there was no more cocoa to buy for any kind of money, right? If you had said to somebody, here's 20,000 a kilo, 20,000 a metric ton, they said, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to sell you anymore, right? All the cocoa is accounted for. The reason why we're seeing this relatively precipitous drop in price, right? So we see a 52-week low. The 52-week low is 3,100. The 52-week high is 12,250. Really important numbers to know, right? We can see that. This is really, really useful information. But we see the price dropping down here to 72.09, which I think is the lowest price. No, 71.66, right here on less than a month. So on May 13th, the price is at 71.69. But the day before, it's 8,800. The day after, it's 9,000. What the heck is going on here, right? And that is no fundamentals changed. So there's nothing about addressing climate change. There's nothing about addressing the age of trees. There's nothing about addressing deforestation. There's nothing about addressing, wages to farmers. Nothing. None of the fundamentals that drove up the price has changed, right? And yet we're getting this really, really crazy volatility. What's happening here? And what's happening here is that people are pinning their hopes on the mid-harvest. They're saying, we think that the mid-harvest, the forecast for the mid-harvest is going to be it's going to return to normal, right? And what we're seeing here is a realization that the mid-harvest, right, is not going to come and save our butts. And that's why I think that the prices have come up. We've got people who are trading. They're trying to get their hands on beans. Inventory is still tight, right? That fact that inventory tight is driving prices up. And keep in mind that almost none of this in the largest producers in the world is going back to the farmer. I mean, it is in a place like Ecuador, but Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Grenada, other places where they're tightly managed regulatory infrastructures in terms of pricing, the farmers are not benefiting from this. In places where the markets are more open and there is the ability for the farmer to say, listen, you want to pay me 9,000, somebody's going to buy later today and spend me 9,100, right? Or if you don't want to spend 9,500 now, it's like, I don't need it because I can see that the market prices it, at 10.5. So I don't need to do this. I mean, this is, one of the first times in history where the farmer, again, at least not in controlled economies, has some negotiating leverage, right? Which is very, very interesting. I'm also saying, if the price is at 10,582, what's the point of fair trade, right? If the fair trade price is not 7,000 a ton, right? Which is where, the fair trade could have, right, something to say in terms of where the bottom is when things settle out, right? I don't think they're going to do that as an organization. I don't think they will. I don't think they have the cojones to be able to actually step in on the part of the farmer and say, well, this is where the price should be, right? I don't care what the market says. This is what the price should be. So we'll see what settles down in the next couple of months. But, you should be prepared following these things. You should say, okay, here is the price, right? Understand what your prices are, stay in touch. And then maybe what you should do is listen, if you're in a place, again, Mark, you're in the Denver area. If there are 4 or 5 other chocolate makers that are near you, you guys should get together and put a very, very large order in, right? And say, the moment you can fulfill this order, right, to one of your suppliers, we'll buy it at this price, right? And so what you can do is you can put your hands on it, and there might be, because you're buying 2 pallets or 3 pallets or 4 pallets rather than half a pallet, right? You might have a little bit more negotiating leverage, right? A little bit better pricing. So it's something to consider, right? And with that, that's more or less what it is that I have to say on this topic today, the economics. If you're a chocolatier, I've been focusing on craft chocolate, but if you're a chocolatier, you need to go through the same exercises. If you're buying in couverture, you can go through these same exercises and figure out, okay, where are my bottlenecks? At a very granular level, what does my price structure look like, and where can I save money, right? Where can I do what it is that I can do to improve the economics of my business. And with that, just a reminder, we're a little bit past time. Number one is this episode of PodSaveChocolate, like every episode of PodSaveChocolate, is sponsored and supported by the members of the Chocolate Life. If you're not a member, click on a green button up here, click on the little plus sign down here. I'm signed in, so it doesn't say join and it doesn't say plus right here. You can go and become a member of the Chocolate Life. Today, for this episode, you'll notice this little box here. It says for a personalized copy of the workbook that I've been working through. So for a personalized copy of this workbook, right, with 1 hour of coaching and consulting, right, what you can do is you can click on this link. You can schedule that hour of time. If you're a premium member, I'll throw in 30 extra minutes at no extra charge, but you'll get a personalized copy of the workbook reflecting your situation, and we can schedule and we can have that meeting this week, next week, whatever makes sense for you. This link is for a service called Cal. It will open up a little calendar and you can select a 1-minute meeting, and when you do that, it'll ask you to pay at the same time. It's very, very cool. I really, really like this integration, make things a whole lot easier. You can pick a time for this week, you can pick a time for next week. It'll give you an idea about when, it's a fabulous service. So I'm doing that. And then, of course, I have all these other resources, right, that are available to you to help you walk through the process. And with that, I want to say thank you very much to everybody. It's been really interesting for me to put this together and to think about it, in terms of this Sunday's members AMA. And what does all of this have to do with the notion of ethics, of cocoa sourcing and sustainability and traceability and things like that? So really, I really do want to thank everybody who's been here at any point. People have been watching for the hour. This is the first episode where I've only streamed to YouTube. So let me know if you think that's a good idea. I'm just trying to get everybody in one place. Makes it easier to track engagement rather than having sort of a part of my audience on YouTube and a part of my audience on LinkedIn and a part of my audience on Facebook. It's a little bit crazy trying to figure out where the engagement is. And with that, yeah, that's it for today. I want to thank everybody for joining me to say come back. Next week, on this coming Friday, there'll be another episode. I'm not sure what it is. Oh, but very, very quickly, just to let everybody know, if you go through the episode, here is a list of upcoming episodes of PodSaveChocolate. So a week from Friday, the AVPA is the French Chocolate Awards for producing at origin. So chocolate's made at origin. So we're going to be talking about who the winners are in this year's round. On Friday, July 5th, it's World Chocolate Day is Sunday the 7th. And so we're going to do something celebrating chocolate around the world on the 5th of July. And then on Tuesday, July 9th, I'm going to be having an episode with David Nilsson, who is a beer judge in Cicerone, who talks about pairing beer and chocolate. And we're going to do a two-parter. Actually, this afternoon, I'm going to be recording the first part of a podcast for David's Bean to Barstool podcast, in which we're going to be looking at pairing chocolate and beer from the perspective of beer. And then on the 9th of July, we're going to be doing the other half of this, which is pairing beer and chocolate from the perspective of chocolate. So David and I are doing this back and forth. I'm looking forward to this next. I think it's going to be a really, really, really fun episode. And I am looking forward to that. And hope you'll join me, share, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff to support what it is we're doing. And with that, I just want to give everybody a quick shout out and say thank you very much. And to remind you, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.